Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Julie Petty, and I work with Meat and Livestock Australia as the Goat Industry Program Project Manager. I'm very pleased to welcome you all along today. We've got an exciting webinar planned all around internal parasite management and control for goats, and taking you through a bit of a demonstration of how the new content that's been uploaded to the WormBoss website can assist you in doing that. But before we get into the content and I introduce our guest speakers, I'll just quickly go through some housekeeping. So with the WebEx program, you not only need to click on the link that you would have received in your email when you registered to join us, but you also need to connect your audio. And you can do that either by phone or using your computer. So you should have received in the email when you registered some instructions on how to do that, along with some codes and so forth, or you can just follow the instructions that we've got up on the screen there as well. If you needed to join via computer, there should be instructions on how to do that in your email, as I mentioned. I should also mention today that the webinar is being recorded, and for that reason, and just to help keep the background noise down, we've muted all the attendees once they join us. So if you did have any questions at any point in time for today's webinar, please just type those into the chat function on your webinar program, and you'll see there that you can send your questions to myself, the host, so I'll be the only one that sees it, or you can send it to everyone. I'll go through those questions and we can ask those of the presenters as we're going through. So that'll be the function if you've got any questions at all for our presenters today. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce, we've got two fantastic guest speakers with us today. Dr. Rob Woodgate is from the Charles Sturt University, and Rob is going to give us a bit of an overview of a project of work that was undertaken reviewing the content within the parasite module going into goats. So Rob's going to give us a quick rundown on that, and then following on from that, we'll have an opportunity for some questions for Rob, and then Dr. Lewis Kahn, who's the Executive Officer of the ParaBoss program, is going to run through the WormBoss website that basically details a lot of the information about internal parasite control and includes some regionally specific information as well. So would I be able to ask everyone, can everyone hear me okay? If you could just pop a comment in the chat box and send that through to the host, that'd be fabulous, because then I'll know you can hear me and I'll know that you found the chat function. That would be wonderful. Woohoo! Excellent. Okay. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. That's great. I can see there's a few people who can hear me, and that's all good. Okay. All right. Rob, if you're ready, I will change the program so that you are the presenter. So if you're ready to rock and roll.
Yep, that's good.
Excellent. Okay. Okay. Over to you.
All right. Thanks, Julie. And afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the invite to be part of this. As Julie said, we at Charles Sturt Uni were involved in a project helping MLA to review some of the goat worm control information in the Going Into Goats module. And part of that work also involved a couple of research students here who have done a survey of goat producers to look at what people were doing in the current industry. And also we're working on some reviews of anthelmintics or worm control agents to feed back to various parts of industry, and then also to the grass level producers as we can. So that's the background here. My job today is just a very quick introduction. My job's to define all the problems, and then Lewis, you've got the rest of the show to solve them. So I'm quite happy and comfortable today. We'll see how we go, but happy to take questions when we can and provide what information we can. So the background, I guess, for me and the reason that we got involved in this work, I'm a veterinary parasitologist, done a lot of worm control work in livestock. And when we talk about goats and talk about the goat industry, then worms are certainly a major problem for goat breeders in Australia and certainly goat breeders worldwide. So the first thing
Rob?
to sort of, yeah?
Sorry, have
Hello?
you shared your screen? We can't see anything.
Oh, okay, all right. Hang on, we'll start again. I thought I had, but hang on.
Sorry.
It's a bit boring.
We're just looking at the webinar program, yes.
Idiot waffling on to himself in the other room.
No, that's fine. Look, you're not
That's
waffling
fine.
on to yourself. There's heaps of people online.
All right, very good. How's that? Is that better?
Yes, excellent.
There we go. Now it might make a little bit, or maybe hopefully make a little bit more sense. So that's the team here. I said a couple of honours students, a couple of other researchers here, some pharmacologists, and the parasitology group within the vet diagnostic lab here. So where do we start? We start with worms, and as I said, one of the important things to realise is that the important worms for goats in Australia are the same as the important worms for sheep in Australia, and so the worms can cross over between the two species. There are a few other weird and wonderful worms around the world, but we're lucky here that we don't have them. So if you think about worm control in goats, the important parasites, the internal parasites or worms that you need to control are the same as those for sheep. So this is a slide showing some Barber's pole worms. So this is the abomasum, or the fourth stomach of the goat that's been opened up, looking at the mucosa or the inner lining of that abomasum, and you can see the Barber's pole worms there, quite big, up to sort of 4 centimetres long. Those of you that have dealt with Barber's pole worms certainly will be well aware of the fact that they suck blood. They can cause problems quite rapidly. They're a wet and warm type of worm, so summer rainfall environments, they can cause significant disease problems very, very quickly. So that's one of the worms we should be aware of. And then the other, what we lump together is the scour worm, so brown stomach worm, which is Teledorsagia, or black scour worm, which is Trichostrongylus. These guys affect the digestion and the gut function, lead to poor productivity, weight loss, maybe some diarrhea, depending on what's happening. So they're the important critters that we need to control. They're the same as the same species of worms as we get in our sheep, and all of those guys can certainly cause production loss, so maybe invisible subclinical production loss, but dollars lost to an enterprise. If it gets out of control enough, then we're certainly going to see disease, paleness with Barber's pole, or scouring and eel thrift with our others, and potential welfare problems on our goat farms as well. So worms are certainly a problem in goats, and I probably don't need to tell you that. What's the solution? Well, obviously, the drenching or giving what we call an anthelmintic, or an active ingredient that kills worms, will always be a cornerstone of the worm control on many properties, sheep and cattle. Right? We've got some sheep here. It's going to be exactly the same for goats. Drenching is always going to be a part of that program, and so it's important to understand the options and the latest information about those. So for sheep here, very easy, we bung a drench into them, and if we walk into a reseller store, there's a wide range of products that we can pick off the shelf, all with different properties, different active ingredients, mixtures of active ingredients, but the sheep guys have got it pretty easy. There's a lot to choose from. When our goat farmer walks into the shop in Australia, the choice is a little bit more limited, to say the least. There's not many products officially registered. So by officially registered, we mean with registration claims for the control of worms in goats. And that's important because those registration claims, the label details that are specific for the species, the host species and the parasites that we want to treat, are the result of a lot of work by the company, safety work, efficacy work, residue work. And so for a company to be able to put on a label that the product is effective against worms in a particular host species, our sheep or our goats, means that they've done all the research to back it up, and that's managed by the APVMA and a federal association in Australia to say that it's safe and effective and the residues are not an issue. So on our goat farms, we walk into the shop and we've really only got 3 main groups to pick from. We've got some benzimidazole drenches, or BZ drenches, or what's known as the old white drenches. So these are some of the actives. These are the actives that are currently registered for goats in that group in Australia: albendazole, fenbendazole, oxfendazole. There is another group called the THP group, of which one of the actives is marantal. So there's a marantal product registered for worm control in goats in Australia. Some of you might have seen that. It's an oral inject sheep and goat wormer, so it's a syringe, a paste formulation for just a couple of doses. And then we do have a macrocyclic lactone or a mectin or an ML group, and Lewis will go through these as we look at WormBoss, but registered for goats in Australia. And the brand name of that one is Capramec. All of those 5 are single active products. Obviously, there's no combination products registered for goats in Australia, and they've got broad spectrum claims. So they're effective against those 3 important parasites according to the label, and there should be a dose rate for goats on those labels. So we've got those products. There is also some triclobendazole products. So triclobendazole is used for liver fluke, fasciola. Fazinex was the original version that was on the market, but there are some triclobendazole products for fluke control registered in Australia as well, to be aware. We do have some products, as I said, fairly limited choice, all single actives. The big complication to that is that there are worms, certainly present on most sheep farms, and so same species of worms, that are resistant to all of those products in Australia. So by resistance can mean a range of things, but generally it's less than 95% effective against those worms. It can be a lot less. So some of the BZ products, those top 3, on some farms in Australia would be 30% or less effective. And so we do have some choices, some registered choices. The other thing you need to keep in mind about those choices is that on many, many farms against the worms that we want to control, there is quite significant resistance present in the worm populations. The other risks when you're thinking about drenching, and this is important because this is getting to some of the survey work that we did. So Leah Brunt, one of our honours students who's now a graduate vet, surveyed 88 goat producers around Australia about their practices and found that a good proportion are using non-registered products. So they're using wormers that don't have goat registration on the label. And some others are also using different dose rates. So they're not using standard dose rates, they're coming up with different dose rates. These are significant risks that you need to understand from a goat enterprise point of view. Firstly, there are potential safety risks. Goats are susceptible, or more susceptible to toxicity with a couple of the active ingredients, lambamazole and closantel in particular, than sheep. So there are risks if you don't abide by the label dose rates and the product's been registered in your species, your goats, then there can be potential safety risks. There can also be potential residue risks. Meat residues, milk residues are also important when you're thinking about dairy goats. And so the APVMA, as we said, has set some guidelines to avoid residue issues. Those are according to label recommendations. So if you go off-label, then there are risks there. The other big risk is that we can, if we make the wrong choice by using off-label products, worsen the resistance in the worms that are inside our goats, and those worms can shift across to our sheep as well, so cause goat problems. And if you happen to have the 2 livestock grazing on the same enterprise, can certainly also cause sheep problems as well. So what do? What does a goat breeder do about worms? And I've sort of thought about this. If I had a goat farm, what are the key messages that I need to consider to start to think about and to start to plan my worm control? And I think there's probably 2 key messages which should hopefully flow on to the information that Lewis is going to show us on the WormBoss website. The first thing is that it's critical to get some good veterinary advice. If you're serious about goats, serious about breeding goats, you're in goats for the long term, it's absolutely critical to make contact with a good local veterinarian who's interested and can access information and provide you with good information about your goats. And certainly when we did our survey of producers, there's a range of veterinarians around Australia who are very keen to provide good, sound scientific advice to goat producers, and you should be making good contacts with those. They can provide you information about those safe, effective and responsible drench choices. If you have a relationship one-to-one with your veterinarian, then it's possible for them to provide you with off-label drench choice information backed up by sound scientific data. And it needs to be, though, on a one-to-one basis, and the specific regulations vary a little bit from state to state, but it needs to be as part of a good relationship with your private vet. So they can certainly help you fine-tune your drench choices, and make sure that if you go off-label that you are still doing the right things from residues, safety, and resistance effectiveness points of view. The other value of that veterinarian, and the other thing that a goat producer needs to understand, and it becomes probably even more critical for a goat producer, is that you can't just rely on chemicals. You need to understand those other non-chemical options, which can help improve your worm control program overall. So the drench choices are a lot more restricted for goat producers. The options are there. The worms are still as important, so it's critical to maximise the benefits from non-chemical aspects of worm control as part of your goat worm control program, and that can really help improve things overall. So this is a photo from an MLA trial that concluded last year, looking at selecting goats for natural resistance to worms, and so similar to what's been done in the sheep industry, but there are options like that, genetic resistance. There are worm egg counts, and certainly a good proportion of the survey respondents were doing worm egg counts to assess whether treatments are needed, assess how to control the worms, assess what the environment is doing. Have you contaminated paddocks and therefore provided a risky environment? Worm egg counts can provide you with a lot of information about what's going on with regards to worms on your property. A lot of the producers have also utilised various other non-chemical support of their worm control, so things like rotational grazing or planned grazing. Good nutrition is always very important to maximise immunity. Planning things like browsing if you're able to. There's a lot of information about that stuff in goats, and the vets and others, as we'll see with WormBoss, can provide you with that. And in fact, there were 3 properties that were organically certified. So we're managing to control goats within managing to control worms and goats, but managing to control worms within a system without the need for chemical treatment. So it's possible. It would need a lot of information, understanding, and support. But certainly, if you're not going to go that way and you're still using chemicals, then these non-chemical options can greatly improve your worm control overall. And that's part of your veterinary advice and other advice. Okay, I think we'll leave it there, Julie, if that's all right. Are you going to open up for questions or on to Lewis?
Yeah, I will. Great. Thank you very much, Rob. So, as we mentioned earlier, if you had any questions for our guest speakers today, please pop those into the chat function of your webinar control panel, and those will pop up for us to ask the presenters. I did have one, Rob, which was around a question around drenches from different, I suppose, chemical groups and families, and whether or not mixing or alternating those helps to reduce the risk of resistance.
Yeah, it can do. I mean, it's a little bit tricky. I guess the first thing with any drench, that the most important thing with any drench that we use is we need to know that it's effective. So that there's no resistance. So there's no point. I mean, traditionally there's been discussion about, okay, if I rotate drenches, I'm going to slow down the development of resistance. If you're doing that with drenches that there is already resistance to, then there's absolutely no benefit. The latest thinking is that often combination of different active ingredients, effective active ingredients, is better at prolonging the lifespan of the individual drenches. The disadvantage we have with goats for that is that there are no combination products. When I say combination products, there are no products where different actives are mixed already in the same drum, and so you would need to do it by multiple treatments. But certainly if you've got more than one effective option and you can use those at the same time, then it can help you with resistance. And that's, I guess, the general principles. It varies a lot, though, depending on your system and the environment, the time of year that you're giving treatments, all of those other variables that come into play.
Okay, thank you. Question: why are so few percentage of goat producers using worm egg counts? Did you have any insight from that from the survey that Leah conducted?
Yeah, I was quite happy actually. I've spent the last 25 years, as has Lewis, or I don't know how long for Lewis, but it's a long time trying to convince sheep producers to do worm egg counts. And I thought the goat figures were better in our survey than the sheep guys. So it was about 30%, I think.
Okay.
more would be better, but as an industry, as I said, certainly no worse than the sheep industry. And it just depends on different people's motivations. Often it's hard to do, or they can't access support to do it. What I will say though is that every producer that I've had experience with who started doing egg counts and sees the value of them will keep doing them. So it's hard to convince people to start them, I think. If you're willing to give them a try and have some good support with it, then you'll soon work out that it is very good information to have.
You can do courses, can't you, as a producer to do worm egg counts at home yourself, get kits as well, is that correct?
Yeah, certainly. It's not rocket science. It's mixing poo with a saturated salt solution and then looking at it under a microscope. You do need a microscope, which can be a few $100s or more. New South Wales DPI was offering courses, training courses for producers, and if anyone else is looking for a course, certainly feel free to email me and I can put you in touch with someone in each state to contact to see what's available. I personally, I think the courses are great because you also learn a lot about worms, worm biology and worm control and epidemiology. So how do the worms behave? What's their life cycle like? A lot of producers that do the courses don't necessarily go on to do the egg counts themselves, but they're a great way to learn a lot more about worms. It's not difficult. If you're super serious about doing it and want to do it, or want to do it for a group of producers that chip in and buy a microscope or something, it's not a difficult skill to learn. It's just a practice thing, really.
Excellent. Okay. So there's a couple of questions here which I think Lewis may address through his presentation. So I'll just read those out and we can hold those over if need be. So where can I get some information about organic plans, and is my vet the only place I can get information about what to do and what a good regime is? So I think in part WormBoss is going to help address that, but is there any additional comments yourself or Lewis would like to make there?
I guess the important thing is you need to, if you're going to use products drenches off-label, then it does need to be a veterinarian. The veterinarian's the only person who is legally allowed to prescribe off-label recommendations in a food-producing animal in Australia. So if you get the advice for off-label advice from anyone other than your veterinarian, then you are breaking the law. You can be breaking the law. From the organics point of view, I'm not sure whether we have a list of providers or consultants in WormBoss for goats yet, but there are some sheep, very good goat vets around Australia who would be able to help you and point you in the right direction for local people as well. Do we have a list of providers, information providers in WormBoss yet, Lewis, or not?
It's starting to come, Rob. Not specifically for goats, but it's certainly going to be developed in the coming months. Yeah.
So I'm not plugging anyone in particular, but there is a lady, Sandra Baxendale, who is a national, certainly probably the national leader in goat disease control as a veterinarian, and certainly Sandra would be someone I'd talk to if I was planning an organic program, and I said she may also be able to help you out with some more local contacts. So if people want specific names, perhaps they can email us in and we can send them out.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so someone's been previously told that it's difficult to breed worm-resistant goats. Wanting to post a link to the recent paper. That's fine, I can do that, that's no worries.
Yep.
And there's definitely some interest for local regional contacts for those veterinary contacts. So I think we'll probably need to circulate something after the webinar to all the people who've registered, if that's okay.
Well, that should be good.
Okay.
I mean, we can certainly build a list on Worm, although there is a list coming on WormBoss as well, so we can build that as well for everybody.
Definitely. And I guess if there's anyone who's joined us on the webinar who has a really good vet that they've got an excellent relationship with, please send that contact information through to us, because there might be potential for us to add that person to the WormBoss database. So that would be probably helpful to other goat producers as well. Right. I think that's it for the questions at the present time. Thank you very much for your assistance there, Rob, and the presentation. That was great. Now, Lewis, if you're ready to go,
Yep.
I will see if I can find you and turn it over so you are the presenter. So sorry, just give me 1 second. Okay, Lewis, over to you. And please remember to share your screen.
Yes. Okay. Just going to find the share screen button there, Julie. I can see that I'm presenter. Okay.
Just a reminder to anyone, if you've got any questions as we're going through the presentations, just pop those into the chat function. And I've got a copy of everyone's email address from when they registered as well. So once we've got this webinar that's being recorded, once we've got that uploaded, I'll circulate that to everyone. And we can also circulate some contact information of different service providers as well.
Sorry, Julie, I'm just having some difficulty here. I'm waiting for the share button to come up on my screen, and I'm just not seeing it.
Okay. Well, okay. Well, I should mention then that we do have, just while we're waiting for Lewis's machine to catch up, we do have a few different events coming up in the next few weeks which may be of interest to goat producers. There's a lot of them located on the Meat and Livestock Australia website listing the upcoming events, but one of them is a total grazing pressure webinar all about basically making sure you're accounting for every mouth in the paddock and the role that goats play and that type of thing. So that webinar is scheduled for the 15th of December, same time, and features guest speakers Trudy Atkinson from the New South Wales DPI and Rick Gates from the Goat Industry Council of Australia. So, Lewis, how are you going? Oh, good. Okay, you're ready to rock and roll. I'll be quiet.
Yeah.
Yes, I am.
Sorry about that,
Thank you.
Julie. Afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to describe the changes that we've made to WormBoss, and thanks also the opportunity that came through the Goat Industry Council of Australia and MLA for funding that work. WormBoss was established in 2005 for sheep, and so it's fantastic to now have goats also included into WormBoss, and as the rotating graphics say on the page, that WormBoss has got even better with the addition of goats. So what I want to do over this webinar is to take you through some of the main functions of WormBoss, and they're going to include things like the solve your current worm problem that you can see with my cursor on the screen here, going through regional programs, going through the drench databases that exist, going through some online learning, and going through a range of tests and tools that exist on WormBoss. We won't be able to see every page or every word, much to your relief, over the next half an hour, but I hope to be able to show you how to get around and get the most value out of WormBoss. The way that we've designed WormBoss is really about helping people to solve their problem, and so our whole approach is if we can help you solve a problem today, you might be more interested in coming back tomorrow in terms of then developing a strategic program. So we call them the Drench Decision Guides, and so the place to start if you're logging on to WormBoss homepage, where we're at, is to click on the Solve Your Current Worm Problem. And please tell me, Julie, if the lag time in terms of what's showing on people's screen isn't matching with how I'm describing what I'm seeing on my own screen. And so on this page, there are sheep drench decision guides and goat drench decision guides. And so we're going to click on the goat drench decision guide. And these DDGs, which are much easier to say, are really the next best thing to having a conversation with your veterinarian in terms of planning whether treatment is required. So if we've clicked on the goat DDG, and then the information is regionalised for Australia, and so you can either go to the particular region if you know where you are, for instance, if you're in Tasmania, or if you're uncertain, We can click on the map of Australia. You can then choose your region, and let's say, for example, we'll choose Victoria. It will show the towns to make sure you're in that region, and then you'll select the region. The DDGs can either be printed to show a PDF by clicking on this button, which is I'll show here, and then what will be displayed will be a hard copy if you wanted to print out of those decision guides. And what they consist of is a series of questions. For example, are these goats showing signs suggesting a worm infection? And whatever your response is, if it's a letter, it's taking you to the second page of these DDGs, which gives the recommendation in terms of responding to how you answered that question. I'm just going back to that page now, and I'll just fill my screen. If we want to use those DDGs online rather than as a printed version, we agree to start the Drench Decision Guide, and exactly those same questions will appear on the screen. So are these goats showing signs? We'll say no signs of worms are obvious this time, and we'll go next. It's asking, are these kids or weaners? And remember, we're in Victoria. We'll say these are not kids or weaners. It's asking if they're bucks, and we'll say they're not bucks. It's asking now if these are does or wethers, and we're asking what time of year it is, and if we say it's November to December and we're in Victoria, and it will provide a recommended action in where my cursor is here, which in this instance is to treat with an effective short-acting drench, which is part of the first summer drenching program for the Victorian region. The DDGs also have a series of guidelines in terms of using anthelmintics in goats, and that covers some of the material that Rob was talking about, that because goats require a different dose rate and withholding period to that on the label, it really is meaning that to use drenches effectively, that goat producers, you'll need to establish a relationship with a veterinarian to obtain a veterinary prescription. There are differences between the states that exist as well, and there are also some guidelines just in terms of best practice ways of using drenches. The Drench Decision Guide, you can restart or you can go back if you decided that you gave an incorrect answer, so you can go back through this whole process as well. So these exist, different guides exist for different parts of Australia, but one of the points that I wanted to point out, Julie, and I'll just go home here again, we're going in to solve your current worm problem, going to our goat drench decision guides, is to show that there are 9 regions, but there's also a region that we describe as the Australian smallholders. And here it's not a region based on geography, but it's for those people who only have a few goats, where they're able to treat and assess individual goats, and they don't want to rely on worm egg counting. Worm egg counting, as Rob said, is still the gold standard, but we appreciate there are some situations where it's not practical for producers to go through that. So we have an Australian smallholders drench decision guide. So Julia, I'm not sure if you would like the opportunity for people to post your questions before I move on to the next section of WormBoss.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. So if anyone's got any questions just in regards to that drench decision guide, please let us know. And I think, Lewis, did you want to expand on, I think, was it Victoria we were looking at yesterday, where you had the different areas on the map there for different recommendations?
Sure.
So you got so quite specific?
Yeah, that was South Australia, Julie.
Sorry.
So no, that's okay. It'll be a good opportunity to go through this again. So we're clicking on the map. This time we're in the bottom part of South Australia, not into the rangeland region. Mm-hmm. We're clicking on that region. And if we print off the PDF version, what Julie is referring to is within South Australia, the recommendations will vary depending on if you're located in the green, the southeast, the higher rainfall Mediterranean, or the lower rainfall Mediterranean. And so not only have we customised the recommendations back to the South Australian regions, but they're also customised to within region as well. And I should say that, Julie, that these DDGs haven't just been created by a few of us sitting in an office. They've been created through widespread consultation with experts and animal health advisors and veterinarians across the country.
Cool, thank you. There's a comment or question that's come through relating to the issue that things like Facebook groups have become the new sort of expert forums for goat advice, where unfortunately, I guess, a lot of less than accurate advice can be provided there. What, if anything, are we able to, I suppose, do to combat that? I guess it's about better promoting the fact that we've now got the WormBoss website content available.
Yes, and WormBoss ParaBoss also has a Facebook page for goats that we've only just established. So that's found under paraboss.goats, and there's a similar one for sheep, paraboss. Well, at the moment the sheep is paraboss.com.au, but it will be changing. So for goats, paraboss.goats is a Facebook page, and I guess, Julie, we're seeing that presence in that environment is important. Rob mentioned Sandra Baxendale, who is, I think without doubt, Australia's leading goat industry consultant, and Sandra was part of the team that brought goat information in, and she also spends a bit of her time on a crusade on social media, making sure that evidence rules the day in terms of decision-making of control.
Yes, that is true. I guess, is this an opportunity also to mention the regular email updates that will be coming that people can subscribe to?
Yeah, thank you, Julie. So ParaBoss is an umbrella organisation that manages WormBoss, FlyBoss and LiceBoss, but in terms of goat producers, WormBoss is where the goat information is. And twice a month, a newsletter can be sent to you if you would like to subscribe, and that subscription is on the WormBoss homepage. I can show you later if Julie, if you think people are interested, but I'm sure they'll find the subscribe. What happens at the end of the month is it's called the State Outlooks. So a range of people who are working in diagnostic labs or as advisors provide their comments in terms of a worm update. That has been going for a number of years now for sheep, and we're asking those people to also provide that information for goats where they have it, and we're expecting that to grow over time. And in the middle of the month is the feature article newsletter. So there are a number of articles. There will generally be 4. One of them will be for goat worms, one will be for sheep worms, and then sheep lice and sheep flies, and there's some quick quizzes that go with that newsletter as well. So, yeah, I really do encourage you to subscribe to receive that.
Excellent. And that's a free subscription that people can sign up for?
That's right, Julie.
Yep, excellent. So there's just a question. You mentioned that the drench decision guide, you should use a short-acting drench this time of year in Victoria. How do we know what those are? Okay, so I might then go off-piste and go straight to the drenches section just to explain that and then to describe it more fully. Okay, so in response to the person who asked that, so here we have the drenches. So if we click on the drenches page, it's a database that can be searched a number of ways. But let me address your question immediately, and then I'll come back to the general. So the first thing we want to do is come over here and select the search by host animal, so we can pick up specific for goats. And we're seeing which animals will you be treating. We're treating goats. We want important scour worms, as Rob has talked about, for example, maybe Barber's pole as well. And here the short-acting drenches, which have effect for 1 day, are provided. Now, for goat producers, it's quite simple. The only registered products at the moment are short-acting products. Now, under the information in WormBoss, we're not suggesting that goat producers restrict their use to only those products, but of course to use and access the other products without compromising things like residue levels.
they'll need a veterinary prescription. So we go short-acting, we go search. It said there's found drenches with one active ingredient, as Rob has already explained. It's saying there are 4 different actives within the BZ group, so the benzimidazole group, each with separate actives, and 1 active from within the macrocyclic lactone group. If we were to choose, for instance, the ivermectin, it's providing information on worms targeted. It's giving some drench resistance notes that currently are based on sheep, and we're upgrading this. There's a few final little things to come through where we've got information for goats. It provides the name of the product, Caprimec. If there was more than one product, they would exist here on a list. It's reminding people of the active, ivermectin, the group, the macrocyclic lactone. It's talking about the administration as oral, the dose rate, the length of protection. Ultimately, there will be a cost in this empty box. It's got the withholding period in the ESI, and if people want to look at the label, then they can click the product label and it's taken to the label that's registered with the APVMA, as Rob has already described. So I hope
that's all regularly updated. Oh, yeah, thank you. And that's all regularly. Yep.
Yes, we contact the pharmaceutical companies every 6 months with their existing list and ask them to provide any changes that have occurred over the last 6 months.
Excellent. Okay, well,
so, maybe while I'm here, Julie, I can just explain some other features on the drenches database. Sure. Okay, so over here, so we've looked at search by host animal, but you may have also have sheep and goats, in which case you can do a search for sheep and goats. You might be searching by a drench group. It's a quick way to look at what are the different groups, drench groups that are available, bearing in mind what's registered and not registered for use with goats. And you might have an actual product that you're searching for. So for in this instance, we might be searching for Caprimec, and there it comes, and so I can click on that as well. So there are 4 different ways to search. You might be searching for less important parasites, or going back up to the search by host animal, and we'll go goats, and you might be searching for liver fluke as well. So there's a whole host of ways to search that drench database. So are there any other questions on that had arisen before on drenches, Julie, while we're here?
No, all good.
Okay, well, I might keep going then to describe your program.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So as I said, the way we've designed WormBoss is to help you solve a problem today. I'm presuming you felt pretty good about that and the result was positive, and you're looking for now a strategic plan that you can adapt to your farm. They're available under your program. You see there are sheep and goats. So we click on your program. It's the same as for the drench decision guides. We're going to goat programs. They exist for, again, all these regions, including the Australian smallholder. This time we might choose, for instance, the map, and we might choose this band that exists on the east coast of Australia that starts at around Cooktown and comes all the way down to Melbourne. We'll select this region. Now, all of the regional programs have the same format. There's a program summary which describes the ways to prevent infection, such as using grazing management, breeding and feeding goats to create resistant goats and goats that are resilient to worms, when to worm test, when strategic drenches are required. So these strategic drenches are without regard to worm egg count, because they're there either because they're an ideal opportunity to drench at the time of year which lowers the number of worm larvae on pasture, or because we know goats at that particular time of year, for instance, coming up to kidding, are even more susceptible than what they usually are, and also ways to manage drench resistance. So that's the summary that can be printed out or to provide quick access. And just to go through that, for example, in that East Coast region, under using grazing management, it's saying it's really important to prepare low worm risk paddocks for kidding does and weaners. And to do that, we need to make sure that there are no worm larvae that develop from feces in the 2 to 3 months before those particular paddocks are needed. And we generate that by either spelling paddocks, grazing with cattle or horses, because the parasites between cattle and horses are largely different, not completely for cattle, but largely different to those for goats, or we grow browse. And this is a really important point here, Julie, that I will just highlight so that people can see that on the screen, is that where it's not possible to use grazing management in this East Coast, then we're suggesting feedlotting of goats can be practiced. And that's because we know that particularly on smallholder properties on the coastal area, worms can just build up to such a level that drenching is so frequent, and that we know that's going to lead to selection for drench resistance. And so if we want more information on any of these particular areas, so for instance breeding and feeding, we can click on the hyperlink, and it will now be taken to a much more detailed amount of knowledge, or level of information, I should say, about breeding for resistance and feeding for resilience. So for example, what is the difference between resistance, which is the goat's ability to resist worm infection, and resilience, which is the goat's ability to tolerate an infection? You know, how does that differ from drench resistance? How can a buck be selected for worm resistance? What are estimated breeding values? It has a link to KidPlan, which is the which is the service that provides the EBVs for goats, provided by Meat and Livestock Australia. It talks about FOMACHA scores, so that's the ranking of the colour of the eye mucous membrane for areas where Barber's pole or blood-sucking parasites are present. And so without going through all of this, the whole issue within these regional programs is if people want more detail, that they're able to find that detail by clicking that hyperlink. And I'll just go back to where we were on the introduction. They can click on the hyperlink and to get a lot more information. And these programs exist for all of these different regions. And if people wanted to compare, they would see that they are quite different. Now, sometimes people find themselves located on the border between one region and another region, and I think that's just a situation where they'll have to refer to both programs or both drench decision guides to get a feeling for what applies to their farm in that particular time. So Julie, that's all in terms of providing the orientation to your program. Just to remind people from the home page, your program, select the goat programs, select the region that you're interested in, confirm with the towns, select the region. We've got a summary. You'll have a quick link to the drench decision guide, and coming in the next few weeks will be another red button sitting next to here, which will be a button which will enable you to print off as a PDF the whole copy, the whole program formatted for printing. I might just pause there, Julie, in case you've received any questions or comments about the regional programs.
Yeah, thanks very much, Lewis. So we've got a couple that have come through. Okay, so when doing my worm egg counts, my results give me the number of eggs, but not the type of worm. So how do I guess, find that out?
Okay, some laboratories will provide what's called a larval culture or differentiation, where they'll culture that feces for a week at a specified temperature. And so they need to find a laboratory then that provides the culture conditions. And so I heard the discussion was under professional service providers and labs before. So just in relation to that question, if people are on the WormBoss homepage and go to tests and tools, down to professional service providers, choose the state that you're in, And these are for sheep at the moment, as saying these will be updated for goats, but most of the laboratories will handle sheep, goat, cattle and horse feces for examination as well. And there will be a range of advisors and also diagnostic labs. And so L is for larval cultures. So we see, for instance, the service provided by Matt Playford through Dorbits provides worm egg counting, the W, and larval cultures. Same with GYST in Armidale, and I'm sure we could find the Charles Sturt Laboratory as well, Rob. Okay. And so that's, if they're not getting that information, then they can use this right now to be able to find a lab that might be able to provide that service for them.
Excellent, thank you. And we've just had a follow-up question regarding the short-acting drench.
Yes.
So if it only lasts for 1 to 2 days, what happens in a fortnight's time? What do you do after that?
Yeah, so what happens is, so the worms that are present at the time the drench is given are killed, and then in essence, 24 hours later, the larvae that are now being ingested from pasture and are now fully able to establish. And Julie, I'll just go back to your program because we've got a great figure to explain that. It doesn't matter which program I'm in. There are a range of appendices in the programs. If we look to the roundworm life cycle, so this is the life cycle now for roundworms within the goat. That's showing on your page, Julie?
Yes. It's quite
Great.
small, but yes.
Okay, then just bear with me and I will just make that a little bit bigger by going into my settings. Is that better?
Yep, thank you.
Marginally. So if we're starting with established worms that are resident in the goat, these are as possible as the adult stage, but they could be as the L3 stage, and I'll explain that as we go around this life cycle circle. But these are the worms that are going to be killed by those short-acting drenches. So the eggs that are laid by the goat before the drench, the eggs that are contained within the feces deposited by the goat, they land on the pasture. The eggs develop through to L1 stage, and L1 is the first larval stage. They'll then develop through to the second larval stage, and they're feeding on bacteria in the fecal pellet at this stage. And they'll finally develop through to what we call the third larval stage, and there's information on that development process here in the life cycle. But that can take, depending on the temperature and the conditions, anywhere from 4 to 10 days. Those L3 now are covered in a sheath, so they're no longer able to feed. They leave the pellet and they find themselves in the pasture sward, and they wriggle incessantly, more so at higher temperatures, in moisture films, and some of them find themselves on the leaf blades. Almost all of them will be below the 10 centimetre height. Goats browse, consume that third stage infective larvae that then molt, and depending which parasite they are, then establish back within the goat. So the day after the drench is given, the ability of the goat to consume these infective larvae off pasture and then have those worms establish within the goat, and then some 18 to 21 days later start shedding eggs and feces again, is totally unrestricted. So they're only killing the parasites that exist at that time and maybe for up to a day afterwards.
Okay.
There are other
Thanks, Lewis.
products that are registered for sheep that go for longer periods, and we do at times encourage goat producers to discuss these with their veterinarian because, again, they'd require an off-label script for that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Well, I think that's the questions for the time. Okay. So, sorry, another one's popped through. So does that mean we should drench each 18 to 21 days?
Certainly not. And if you're finding that you do need to drench every 18 to 21 days, then you would really need to be looking at what grazing management procedures have you got in place to reduce the number of worm larvae on pasture. And I'll just go back to that picture, Julie, I shouldn't have left there. So bear with me for a moment. Okay, I want to show people this graph here. So this graph principally relates to barber's pole. It will also relate to black scaleworm, but there are some differences with brown stomach worm, but the general principle holds. So what this is describing is if there was 100 of those infective larvae, the third stage larvae that are on pasture present today, and if the daily maximum temperature, we'll choose the green, it's an easy one to see, was 25 degrees, then there would be only half. So half of those infective larvae on pasture would have died by about 25 days. And they die because they're covered in a sheath, they're not able to feed, they're basically on a starvation period, and they're wriggling, using up their energy reserves. The hotter the temperature, the more they wriggle, the quicker they die. So if somebody found themselves in a situation where they are needing to drench every 21 days, firstly we'd be asking what are the cues that they're using? Have they got worm egg counts to confirm that they are really high enough for treatment, or are they looking at eye colour? Then they'd be saying, well, if I'm continually grazing a paddock, then it's little wonder, and particularly with maybe a high stocking rate, it's a little wonder that the pastures have a lot of infective larvae. How can I start to provide spelling or provide browse so that goats aren't grazing downwards but grazing upwards and avoiding the worms? Do I have horses on my property or cattle that I can graze there while the goats are in another place? Then they should be then looking towards, have I been buying my bucks based on using negative worm egg count estimated breeding values? So in other words, buying bucks that are genetically resistant to worms so that the progeny become more resistant over time. And if all of those things are difficult and the decision to drench is based on the evidence of worm egg counts or looking at eye colour, then really feedlotting should be considered. Otherwise, what we generally find is that drench resistance occurs when you do start to have frequent use of drenches because we're not looking at other non-chemical approaches.
Thanks, Lewis. We've just got one more question that's come through, which is saying there's been some conflicting advice about whether or not to put goats on clean pasture after drenching. What are your thoughts on that? I imagine they're concerned about contamination of that pasture.
I think and that's a great question, they're concerned about refugia, I think it is. So here we're talking about concerned about, does that accelerate drench resistance? So what I'm going to do, Julie, is just to show where that information is. Is that better with the screen magnified up a bit, or is it now more difficult?
No,
okay,
that's
great.
good.
So if we look under tests and tools, management tools, so here we're talking about drench resistance. Here on the left-hand side, drench resistance, managing drench resistance, and here's this concept that I mentioned about refugia. So what that question is referring to is there are situations where if we think about green pasture, where most of the worms are on the pasture and very few of the worms are in the sheep. However, if we've deliberately generated low worm risk pastures, then very few worms will be on pasture. When we drench sheep into that paddock, any resistant surviving worms, the eggs that they lay that are then shed in feces and then develop to infective larvae, they've got no competition, so they make up a high proportion of the new population on the pasture. And if they were resistant as adults that laid the eggs, then their progeny will also be resistant as well. So the importance of refugia, which might essentially be that you put the goats into a paddock for a week before drenching them, or you leave some goats untreated at the same time, that's still an area where we're having to develop what is our recommendations in terms of how is it applied for both sheep and goats. We know that the question that's raised in terms of concerns about drenching into low worm risk paddocks, that's most important in, for example, in Mediterranean zones where we've got long, hot, dry periods that really do encourage drench resistance, and we know with the modelling work done by sheep that question is a big concern, but it is less of a concern through Victoria and southern New South Wales because of the way that some of those major parasites are able to hang around in the pasture and the pellet for longer periods of time. So I would refer that reader to this page. We also have on the home page, we also have a contact us. And if they're still after more information, or not that we provide specific information, but we're very happy to point out where it is on the website there, we'd be like them to contact us as well. I realise it hasn't gone to giving a definitive answer because there isn't one definitive answer that covers the whole of Australia in terms of that, other than, yes, drenching into a low worm risk paddock is a risk factor for managing drench resistance, but there's a number of ways that can possibly be used to address that, and most of that information is on our website.
Great, thanks, Lewis. Well, that's it for the questions at the moment, so if you want to move on to the next section.
Okay, so while we're in management tools, I might just stay there, and just to point out to people that, for example, if they had chosen let's choose one, host immunity, because you're wanting to know more about immunity. The tabs that exist on the pages are for sheep or for goats. What you'll find is the first time you will use it, it will be configured to show the sheep page, but we've got the system designed so it will learn that if you've logged on and gone to goats, then over a short period of time it will start to show goats as your default option. And so that, for instance, for goats, it's going to provide information on immunity where we know that the development of immunity in goats is less than what it is for sheep. So it provides, these management tools provide a lot of information in terms of how do you manage immunity, how do you manage grazing management, for example, for sheep and goats, and see it's picked up already that I'm in goats. So what are the basic elements? How do you go about the process? If we were with nutrition and we wanted to look at feedlotting of goats. So there's an awful lot of information that sits within our website. Similarly, if you wanted information on the worms, you could click worms and roundworms. And if you wanted information on Barber's poleworm, then that information will be there as well. Location, signs, diagnosis, and treatment. And Julie, the last thing that I wanted, I'll just go back to the home page, I wanted to show people is we have the Learn Worm Control online. So that's if you're interested in going through the website to learn more about worm control for your goats. So we click on that. Again, sheep and goats, it's picked up, I'm interested in goats. And there's either, you can use that learning either through a structured reading approach or question and answers. I'll see if this is going to work at the moment. So I figured we've just got a little glitch with this page at the moment that we will fix. Just bear with me, I'll just try one more area. No, I'm sorry, Julie, but what will happen is people will be able to click on Learn Worm Control online, go to the goat page, they will click on this region that they're interested in, and rather being taken to the program, which is happening at the moment, they'll be taken to a series of questions and answers or some suggestions in terms of what are the pages to read to find information on particular areas. I'm sorry that that's not working at the moment. We've just got a little bug with that part of the website. And Julie, that was all that I wanted to show those that are on the webinar, and hopefully they're able to navigate around. And just finally, if they are interested in the news, subscribing to the news as you mentioned, they need to go to ParaBoss, which is our umbrella, and then they can start to subscribe to ParaBoss News. So I'll just go back to WormBoss, and That's all I have, Julie.
Great, thank you. That was excellent. Look, we've got a question that's come in asking whether or not it's possible. So you're talking about the ability to rotate with horses and cattle. Would you also be able to rotate with pigs?
Yes, and the key point here is do the parasites of the other species, in this instance pigs, are they in common with the goat? And for the pig, the answer is no, unless, Rob, there are some unusual parasites that pigs and goats share? No, we'll take that as a no.
No, yeah, definitely not.
Yeah, so that would be an excellent idea.
Excellent. Well, look, I think we've just about exhausted all the questions that have come through. Thank you so much, Rob and Lewis, for your time today in the presentations. And I can tell just by the number of questions we've had coming through, it's been of great interest to everyone who's dialed in. So thank you very much to all our participants who joined us for today. Oh, no, we've got one more question that's come through, and we might make that one the last one. But the question just relates to what does the sharing of the paddock with these other species actually do to the worms?
Okay, so what happens is, let's for example say a horse is now grazing in the goat paddock and the goats have been removed elsewhere. The horse is eating the grass, so it's eating some of those infective larvae that are on the grass. But because the horse isn't the preferred host to those worms, in essence, those larvae are killed during that process. They're just not able to establish in the horse and reproduce. So that's one way that the number are reducing. But the key importance is just simply time, Julie, that as I showed before, that those larvae are dying every day. Some are dying because they're running out of energy reserves. The hotter it is, the quicker they die. And so the longer that horse, for example, is grazing in the paddock, the longer we have just to allow those L3, the infective larvae, to die. And so remember, on that East Coast region, because the temperatures are much more uniform, what we're able to predict is that within as little as 2 or 3 months, quite a significant proportion of those infective larvae will have died. Therefore, that's the main benefit from grazing with another species.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Lewis. Look, I've just had that respondent come back and say that they're really pleased you've given them another reason to keep their horse. So I might just change the system back to make myself the presenter. And okay, so all right. So if you needed any further information or anything, please pop along to the WormBoss website that we've got up there on the screen. Hopefully everyone can actually see that at the present time. Yeah. Sorry. Oop. We've also got, so there's a whole bunch of other webinars that have been recorded by both MLA and other entities that may be of value to the audience today, which we've got listed there. And don't worry, I will circulate a copy of this presentation to everyone who's registered as well, so you get all these links and information for you to pop along to. There's obviously the Goats on the Move newsletter, which comes out quarterly, which people are welcome to subscribe to, and that includes all sorts of goat information and news. And, of course, there are the MLA market reports. And we've also got a whole bunch of upcoming events which may be of interest to people spread across the country. And, again, some of these are MLA related and some are not. Including our next webinar, which is on the 15th of December, and as I mentioned before, is all about total grazing pressure and goats. And I might also mention that thank you again, everyone, for joining us for today's webinar. MLA is a service provider to the red meat industry, so we work in collaboration with all the different peak industry councils to provide this and many other services to red meat producers. And specifically, we look at research, development, adoption, and of course, marketing. And if you We're wondering, it's not automatic that you're an MLA member. You actually need to sign up on our website, and that's freely available to red meat producers, and it gives you the option to vote at things like our AGM and subscribe to all the different the newsletters and information that we circulate to people. So that's all I really had. So I just wanted to say thank you very much to everyone for your time today, and particularly Rob and Lewis. That was an excellent overview of the information that's available for producers. So without further ado, we might end the webinar, and thank you so much again.
Thank you, Julie.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks.